Hurtgen Forest, November 1944. A squad of veteran German grenadiers lies perfectly concealed in the dense, dark woods. They watch as a small American patrol walks carelessly into their pre-sighted kill zone. The German NCO holds his hand up, signaling his men to wait. A perfect ambush. But before he can give the order to fire, the air is torn apart by an impossibly loud shriek. It's not one shell, but dozens, arriving at the exact same instant. The entire position erupts in a storm of steel and earth. The few survivors, deafened and terrified, are left with a single, chilling question. There was no ranging shot, no warning. How did the Americans know? The experience of those German grenadiers was not a fluke. In post-capture interrogations, prisoners from all fronts consistently named American artillery as the single most terrifying element of the war, more feared than the Sherman tank or the P-47 Thunderbolt. They called it steel rain, describing a force that was unnaturally accurate and overwhelmingly fast. This is a documentary investigation into the system that created that fear. How did the U.S. Army, which began the war with a tiny, outdated force, engineer an artillery network so lethal and responsive that it seemed almost supernatural to its battle-hardened opponents? The answer is not a supergun, but a revolutionary and nearly invisible system. To understand this system, we must first understand its absence. In 1941, the United States Army was a ghost of a force. While the German Wehrmacht was conquering a continent, the U.S. Army ranked 17th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. Its equipment was largely from the last war, and so was its thinking, especially when it came to artillery. The official doctrine was a direct inheritance from the static trench warfare of 1918. Artillery was for massive, pre-planned bombardments against fixed positions. It was slow, methodical, and profoundly inflexible. Crucially, control was decentralized. An artillery battery was often assigned directly to a local infantry commander who treated it as his personal heavy weapon. This meant a battalion commander might have a few guns at his disposal, but the division's total firepower was fragmented, used piecemeal for small local actions. There was no mechanism to quickly focus the power of dozens or even hundreds of guns onto a single fleeting target. In stark contrast was the German model. The Wehrmacht of 1941 were the undisputed masters of modern, fast-paced warfare. Their doctrine, which the world came to know as Blitzkrieg, was built on speed, surprise, and combined arms. For them, artillery was not a blunt instrument for pulverizing trenches. It was a scalpel, wielded by maneuver commanders on the front line. German artillery officers, often moving with the lead panzers, could call in precise, rapid fire to smash a point of resistance, cover a flank, or break up a counterattack, all in minutes. Their system was designed for opportunity, for the fluid, chaotic reality of the modern battlefield. This was the chasm the Americans had to cross. The challenge was monumental, not just to build millions of guns and shells, but to build a new brain, a new nervous system, for a citizen army that had yet to fire a shot in anger. How could a force starting from such a disadvantage hope to compete with, let alone surpass, the most experienced and tactically sophisticated army in the world? The answer began not on the battlefield, but in classrooms and on dusty training grounds at the Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. A small group of visionary officers, led by men like Brigadier General Charles P. Summerall, had developed a radical new theory on paper. It was the antithesis of the old doctrine. It was built on the principles of centralization, flexibility, and the massing of overwhelming firepower. But a theory is one thing. The real question remained: would this untested American concept survive its first brutal contact with the German war machine? The answer would come on March 23, 1943, in the desolate hills of Tunisia. At the Battle of El Guettar, The U.S. 1st Infantry Division, bloodied from its first brutal encounters with the Afrika Korps, was on the verge of breaking. General von Broick's 10th Panzer Division, a veteran unit fresh from the Eastern Front, launched a concentrated assault with 50 tanks and supporting infantry. They punched through the American forward positions with terrifying ease. To the German commanders, it was a classic breakthrough. The inexperienced Americans were about to collapse. But as the panzers advanced, something happened that was not in any German tactical manual. From a hidden observation post, a single American lieutenant made a call. That call did not go to the 4 guns of his local battery. It was routed to an experimental hub, the Division Artillery's Fire Direction Center. Within 3 minutes, the lead German tanks drove into a storm of steel. It wasn't a scattered barrage. It was a sudden, violent wall of annihilation. 9 separate artillery battalions, over 100 guns from the 1st Division's organic artillery and attached corps units, all brought their fire down on a single, moving target at the same instant. The German attack shattered. Stunned by the impossible speed and overwhelming concentration of the fire, the 10th Panzer Division recoiled, leaving 30 destroyed tanks on the battlefield. The theory from Fort Sill had met reality. For the first time, this untested American system had faced the masters of blitzkrieg and stopped them cold. El Guettar was the proof. A concept born in a classroom had passed its trial by fire. But to understand the terror it created, we must go beyond a single battle. We must follow a single fire mission, from a desperate call for help to its devastating conclusion, and dissect the machinery of steel rain piece by piece. It begins with the eyes of the Army. He is not in a concrete bunker or a command post. He is a forward observer, an FO, often the young lieutenant or a sergeant, pushed to the very edge of the front line. He might be huddled in a crater or perched in a church steeple, accompanied by only a radioman or a wireman. His primary weapons are not a rifle, but a pair of M1938 binoculars, a standardized military map, and a telephone handset. He is the first link in a lethal chain. When a U.S. infantry platoon is pinned down by a German machine gun, the FO doesn't just shout for help. He translates the visual chaos of the battlefield into the cold, hard language of mathematics. On his map, the world is a grid of 1,000 meter squares. He locates the enemy position, that flash from the tree line, the dust kicked up by the MG-42, and determines its 6-digit grid coordinate. He then picks up his phone and makes the call. Request fire mission. Target, grid 247831. Machine gun in open. Request 1 battery, 5 rounds. The pressure on this single man is immense. A transposed number, a misread line, and the rounds intended for the enemy could just as easily fall on the men he is trying to save. In the brutal calculus of the front, his precision is the only line between rescue and disaster. That call for fire now travels through the Army's nervous system. It's not a wireless signal beamed from a satellite, it's a physical impulse, traveling down a thin strand of copper and steel. This is the work of the Signal Corps. Following every advance, linemen unspool thousands of miles of WD-1 telephone wire, often under direct fire. They carry heavy DR-8 reels on their backs, connecting battalions to regiments and regiments to divisions, creating a vast, resilient web of communication. This wire was the preferred method, secure, reliable, and immune to German electronic warfare. The SCR-300 walkie-talkie on the FO's back was a critical backup, but radio signals could be intercepted, used for direction finding, and were notoriously temperamental in the forests and hills of Europe. The humble telephone wire, laid by hand in mud and snow, was the true backbone of the American artillery system. The FO's request, now an electrical signal, arrives miles behind the front in a place that has no windows and no view of the enemy. The Fire Direction Center, or FDC. This is the brain. It could be a cramped dugout, the cellar of a ruined farmhouse, or a simple canvas tent. Inside, there are no flashing supercomputers. Instead, a team of enlisted men, specialists trained for months, huddle over a large plotting board, a giant detailed map on which the battle is tracked in real time. They are human computers. When the FO's coordinates come in, they are just the starting point. The FDC team immediately begins a rapid-fire series of calculations. They consult meteorological data sent from weather balloons, correcting for wind speed, air temperature, and barometric pressure, all of which can alter a shell's flight path. They check their charts for the specific guns that will be firing, adjusting for the minute loss of muzzle velocity from barrel wear. They factor in the location of their batteries and the location of the target. Within minutes, this storm of variables is distilled into two simple commands for each gun battery, an azimuth for direction and an elevation for range. This central hub, the FDC, was the revolutionary heart of the system. It could take a request from any observer and assign it to any gun, or every gun, in its network. The commands are sent back down the wire, but the order is not simply fire. The FDC has selected not one, but three separate batteries of M2A1 105mm howitzers to answer the call, 12 guns in total, located in different positions miles apart. And they will execute the system's deadliest innovation, time on target. The FDC calculates the precise flight time for a shell from each battery to the target grid. For a battery 5 miles away, it might be 30 seconds. For a battery 6 miles away, it might be 38 seconds. The command that goes out is not fire on my command, but time on target, 1632 hours. Each of the 12 gun crews receives their firing data, loads their howitzer, and waits, watching the second hand on their watch. The crew farther away fires first. Then, 8 seconds later, the closer battery fires. The guns do not fire in unison. They fire in a carefully orchestrated sequence. For the German machine gun crew, there is no warning. No single ranging shot whistling overhead, giving them seconds to dive for cover. The first thing they hear is the sound of 12 33-pound shells arriving at the exact same instant. The air seems to crackle, as if the sky itself is being ripped open. From their perspective, it sounds like a single, impossibly large cannon has fired on their position. In post-battle interrogations, German prisoners would struggle to describe it. One called it a sudden, violent tearing of the air. Another said the sky seemed to be zipping open directly overhead. The psychological impact was profound. Against an enemy who could summon this steel rain from a clear sky, with no warning and with terrifying precision, cover was an illusion and experience offered no defense. From the German foxhole, the American system seemed flawless, an omniscient and perfect killing machine. But the reality, hidden in the daily operational reports and logistical ledgers of the U.S. Army, was far more complicated and far more costly. But this system was far from flawless. After-action reports are filled with the tragic consequences of its fallibility. A single misplotted coordinate on a map could, and did, bring friendly fire down on American positions. A German artillery shell severing a single telephone line, or a jammed radio channel in dense forest, could delay a critical fire mission by precious minutes. Minutes in which an infantry company could be decimated while waiting for the steel rain that never came. The true secret to the system's terrifying effectiveness was not its perfection, but its overwhelming industrial power. The American doctrine was a conscious choice: trade a nearly infinite supply of shells to save the lives of its citizen soldiers. The U.S. fired artillery ammunition at a rate that dwarfed its enemies. This was a logistical miracle, sustained by massive supply operations like the Red Ball Express, which raced millions of shells from the ports of Normandy to the front lines. The system wasn't always precise, and it wasn't always on time. It was brutally effective because it could afford to be. It was a flawed, resource-devouring machine, and in the brutal winter of 1944, it would face its ultimate test, where every one of its strengths would be desperately needed, and every one of its weaknesses could prove fatal. December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Forest. In the opening hours of Hitler's last great offensive, the 101st Airborne Division is rushed to the vital Belgian crossroads of Bastogne. Within days, they are completely cut off, surrounded by 7 German divisions. Outnumbered, freezing, and critically low on ammunition, their situation seems hopeless. But inside the shrinking perimeter, the 101st's artillerymen had created something extraordinary. All divisional artillery units, trapped with the infantry, consolidated their command into a single fire direction center. For the first time, the system wasn't just supporting a linear front, it was defending a circle. This became the nerve center of the siege. The FDC plotters worked in shifts around the clock, tracking enemy movements from every point on the compass. Telephone lines to the observers on the perimeter were constantly being severed by German shelling and desperately repaired under fire. Radio batteries died in the bitter cold. Ammunition was so scarce that fire missions were triaged like wounded soldiers. Only the most critical threats were engaged. When a German Panzer Grenadier assault was spotted massing in the fog-shrouded woods, a single call would go to the FDC. There was no time for adjustment. The human computers in the command post would calculate a single, desperate solution, diverting every available howitzer from all sides of the circle to focus on one grid square. German veterans of the attack would later describe a horrifying experience. Not a barrage, but a sudden, total obliteration of an entire sector, arriving from all directions at once. The system, pushed to its breaking point, held the line. It saved Bastogne. We returned to the Hurtgen forest, and the German grenadiers waiting in perfect ambush. Their destruction was not the work of a spy or a lucky guess. It was the final, lethal output of the system we have just dissected. A forward observer, hundreds of yards away, likely never saw the German position itself. He saw his own patrol walking toward a pre-sighted kill zone. Anticipating the enemy's most logical point of attack, he called in a fire mission on that exact spot. The request hit a fire direction center. Multiple batteries received their commands, and the shells were coordinated for time on target. The grenadiers never stood a chance, because they were not fighting a platoon. They were fighting an entire organizational weapon, an invisible network of observers, wiremen, and human computers, all powered by an industrial engine an ocean away. This was America's answer to the Wehrmacht's tactical brilliance, a doctrine of systematic, massed firepower. It proved that modern warfare was becoming a contest not just of battlefield courage, but of systems, a war of information, logistics, and lethal mathematics. For the German soldier, the fear was the shell that landed without warning. But the real weapon wasn't made of steel. It was a system, invisible and miles away, waiting for a phone call.